Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Loughborough University's Institute of Advanced Studies. I'm Professor Ksenia Chmut, and I'm director of the IIS, and it's our absolute pleasure to host our residential fellow, two fellows this month, which is super exciting. Our residential fellow, Dr. Ranit Chatterjee. So we continue on my favorite topic of resilience today. So I've been I'm in a role really, but really today we're kind of going to talk a little bit more about regulatory mechanisms, if only I could pronounce that, and kind of building resilience, what it means. This is a really important topic, particularly in the context of climate change, so it's wonderful that we are having this presentation today. Just a very quick introduction to Ranit's work. So Ranit started as an architect, and then something went right or wrong, I'm not sure. So he turned into a disaster risk manager. Ranit did his PhD in Japan, in Kyoto University, but he has worked all around Southeast Asia. In particular, he worked in Nepal, in India, obviously, in Laos, and many other countries. Ranit and I share a kind of an interest in disaster risk management for cultural heritage, and that's how we met. So I'm sure you will touch upon that today somewhere. It's all about that. Always, all about that, always. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. A couple of housekeeping rules before we start. For those of you online, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A section on Zoom. We will have time over lunch and after the presentation for questions and comments in the room too. We are recording the presentation, and that will be released on YouTube channel as a podcast, but we will not be releasing Q&A. So you can ask anything you want. With that, Ranit, over to you.
Thank you, Ksenia, and a very good afternoon to everyone here. So yes, I would be talking about the customary regulations, which actually define to me how we have coexisted with the ecosystem services, and we have been able to create a balance. And what is happening is, because of the development processes becoming very rapid, possibly that very delicate balance is getting disturbed. And how we can recreate or look into that balance is very important, looking into the increase in cases of disaster events which are happening, the increase in natural hazard frequencies, severities that is affecting, and also the climate change impacts all across the world. I'll be focusing my talk on Sundarbans, the Indian Sundarbans. I'm sure many of you might have heard about Sundarbans. Many of you might have visited Sundarbans. If not, I'll take you through it. And it's a beautiful place to be. This is Sundarbans for you. Sundarbans is a group of islands in the Bay of Bengal, where you have some of them inhabited, some of them are not. And you can see that many of these islands, the land use pattern, you have national parks, reserve forest, and designated areas which possibly are beyond the human habitation. But you have a lot of flora and fauna, which is very important in that area. Because you have 400 types of fishes, 300 types of birds, reptiles, 35 types of reptiles, and Sundarbans is known for the Royal Bengal tiger. I'm sure that excites you all. And in Sundarbans, it has been, in India, the Sundarbans honey is quite famous. Almost more than 90% of the honey in India is actually from Sundarbans, collected from Sundarbans. So almost 15 to 20% of the livelihood of people is dependent on honey collection and aviary. And beekeeping, sorry. There are around 4.5 million people staying in this area. And Sundarbans on the other side is still bigger on the Bangladesh side, but both of them share a culturally similar trait. And also both of the sides are now having a risk of being affected by climate change, and also the natural hazard events which are linked to the climate change. This is Sundarbans. Isn't it beautiful? I have been there after the 2009 cyclone Isla for an assessment. It's like Sundarbans is divided into two sides. Like one, like in West Bengal, we call them districts. So Sundarbans has two districts, south and north, 24 parganas. You can access most of these islands by boat, and it's beautiful. Like you can see the river Gangetic dolphins, which are a bit different from the general dolphins which you see. They are pinkish in color, smaller, and they follow the boats. You have so Sundarbans is beautiful, but it's also risky. In Sundarbans, they say you have tiger on land, crocodiles on water, and snakes as well. And then you have Sundarbans is a favorite spot of cyclones. So that's Sundarban for you. But Sundarbans is also a World Heritage Site. And the outstanding universal value for why it is a World Heritage Site is actually something linked to disaster management. It's the distinctive physiology of Sundarbans, which is linked to its deltaic islands, flooding, monsoon, and the tidal influence and plant colonization. That is what makes the island. And along with it, the exceptional biodiversity which is there in Sundarbans. So it's all about, it's very much interlinked to climate change, disaster, and ecosystem services. And that's the heritage of Sundarbans, which is now at risk. So this is Sundarbans for you in pictures. Those are the mangroves. So in Sundar, the word Sundarban is from the tree, which is called Sundari. This is the Sundari tree. So that's how Sundarban gets its name, from the mangrove tree. Tigers, crocodiles, and this is very interesting. When people go to collect honey in the forest, they always wear a mask, because the belief is if you wear a mask at the back, the tiger won't attack you because you are looking into the tiger's eyes. So that's a tradition which is followed in Sundarbans when you go for honey collecting, or anyone who's boating and stuff. So you have eyes both sides. But it's also a high risk zone, as I said. So you have very high risk of flooding and exposure to cyclones. And you can see in this, most of this, islands which are along this outer periphery of it is exposed. So every 3 years, you would have a major cyclonic storm affecting this area. The recent one was in 2020 and 2021 during COVID, and it was a big compounding impact because you could not have, during COVID, there was a lot of restrictions and in movement, and so the rescue work and all the relief work was highly impacted because of COVID. But that's a cycle which Sundarbans has been having. Along with it, it is also exposed to riverine erosion. So islands are exposed to erosion. So these islands over here, you can see so there is a lot of cutting action which is happening. So the islands are getting, reduced from because of the riverine erosions. Also, salinity ingression is happening. So it's a combined risk that these areas are exposed to. And these are some of the pictures of how, so you can see the embankments which people try to build, or the government also are trying to build, actually doesn't stay because of the erosions. And mostly in the cyclones and storm surge, so it gets affected very badly. The last one was in last 3 cyclones, around 250 people died, and the loss was around 20 billion USD in this area. And being very remote, it's very difficult to actually access these islands once such kind of events happen. The picture over there was when I went there during cyclone, and this was very interesting to me because it was the only tree which was standing. This used to be an embankment which has been breached by the water, and this was the last tree which was standing there. Sundarbans is sinking because of the impact of the sea level rise, and along with it also because of the coastal erosion. So it's shrinking, sinking, both. And that's where it's forcing people to look for options, making people fall more easily for the pull, which is being always there from Kolkata. Kolkata is very close to Sundarbans. It's around, it's on the, Sundarbans is on the periphery of Kolkata. So Kolkata anyway exerts livelihood pull to Sundarbans, but that pull has been exaggerated because of this natural actions, which is actually risking people there. So I'll just touch on this, that mangrove ecosystem, which Sundarbans is, in Sundarbans, it's a very important part, has been one of the most efficient ecosystems of all, which for some or the other reason was not always the main focus of intervention, because it's muddy, it stinks, but when you look into the services which mangrove ecosystem provides, they possibly actually are much more advantageous in comparison to all the other ecosystems. And the interesting thing is mangrove comes almost on the edge of land and water. They connect land and water. And that's what makes the mangrove ecosystem very interesting, because that's where both the marine as well as the land flora and fauna thrives. So we derive various kind of ecosystem services, and like in Sundarbans also we do get all this, including tourism, water filtration, fisheries, and many of such things. But the problem here is these all are exposed because of the natural and anthropogenic factors working together, where the anthropogenic factor is actually more imposing on the natural factor. And that balance, which should be maintained between the anthropogenic and the natural factors, is somewhere getting broken because of too much of commercialization and too much of pressure which is being put on the natural systems. And what we see is the socio-cultural, economic, natural, and institutional parameters are getting affected. Like there's a lot of this change in the fishing industry. A lot of commercialization is happening. There's extraction of fishes at a much higher rate, where the fish cannot possibly match up to the extraction that is happening there. Too much of logging of the forest areas. Then there's a change also, like people used to go off fishing. Now there is a lot of aquaculture happening, where people are building like this small prawn cultures and stuff. So that itself would need brackish water to be stored, which doesn't support also the other ecosystems, like the forest areas for certain things. Also, people don't want to continue having the ecosystem, like not the ecosystem, sorry, the mangroves there. So because they need to clear up mangroves, and that's again a threat for this area. So what we see here is, of course, the sea level rise, cyclones and floodings, where this mangroves become the first line of defense, and they also get affected. They're broken, they're sometimes damaged, and it takes time for them to regenerate, they come to the same health which they were earlier. So it's not just about having the mangrove there, it's about not having the green cover there, but also about the health of the mangrove, which is generally not always the focus when you look into such kind of surveys of green covers in such areas. And this is not only in Sundarbans, because I had also worked on the other side of India, in western part of India, where again the same issue was there. Then we are also facing water issues, but not here. Possibly severe droughts we are not having, but still there is a chance rise or lowering of temperatures, and that also affects how the mangroves survive, because that would define what kind of mangrove species will survive. Because if you don't have a very good mix of mangrove species, that shows that there is an environmental pressure on that area, where then it becomes a monospecies surviving there. And generally that has been seen also in other parts, like Avicennia marina possibly is the most hardiest of all mangrove species. And if you see more Avicennia marina surviving, possibly that's also shows that there is a lot of pressure on the land, on the environment there. And of course, new disease and pests, which affects the forest area and also the flora and fauna. And if you look into the development processes, like what you saw, like there was sea embankment or sea walls being built so that you can stop the inland areas from storm surge or from tsunami or being affected by flooding. But the problem is with mangrove, if you do that, you are actually decreasing the mangrove cluster because it doesn't spread beyond the seawall because it needs interaction, like the tidal wave function. That's where the mangroves thrive. So it doesn't go inland, and then there is erosion happening. So you're going on reducing the mangrove cluster there, and that's something this is an anthropogenic threat which is destroying this mangrove ecosystem there. So, and this all has impacts on the livelihood, which is changing, the frequency and severity of hazards and how they affect the inland areas. And it's also triggering migration from this area and also existence of various local species, which were earlier there, and people had values and their cultural system was linked to it. So in 2020, the loss of mangrove in Sundarbans, if you look at it, so many of these islands which were there as high-risk islands, which in the earlier picture, that's where you would see a lot of mangrove loss happened. And this is a continuous, like this is happening every 3 years. So in the cyclone cycle. And if such kind of huge amount of mangrove loss happens along with the anthropogenic factors, which is going to further deteriorate the mangrove health there, it's very difficult to put the mangroves as the first line of defense and also depend on the mangroves for your livelihood and all other ecosystem services that you get benefit out of it. So in Sundarbans, it's basically this linked landscape, which has been there for a very long time. Like you have the spatial temporal linkages, where from generations, they have learned how to use the forest resources. And that has been there as, there has been kind of that balance there. And these were linked to the cultural systems to create that balance. I'll come to that. And also, they have faced various events or disaster events in the past, which has built the lived experiences and also the knowledge base to how to mitigate such kind of events. What is happening now is possibly the frequency and severity is changing. They are not able to cope up with the pace with which the knowledge needs to be upgraded. There's also place-based identity and customary rights and religion, which is attached to the forest. And I'm not sure how many of you have been here or have known Sundarbans, but there's a very interesting thing. Like there's forest goddess, which is called Bone Baby, which I'll talk about in my next slide. So there's this thing, like the forest goddess is the protector of the forest, and you need to pray to her before you enter forest to protect yourself from the tiger, right? And Johannama is a written guideline of what you should do and what you should not do in the forest. And it's a customary regulation which has been put in place for centuries, which has been in a way regulating how you use the forest resources. And also Palagan is a way to communicate through songs, this customary regulations. And that is very interesting because this Palagan also gets the narrative changes with various disasters. Like Palagan now has a narrative on Cyclone Isla and how it affected life. So it's a continuous dynamic process of being, from transferring the knowledge from one generation to the other. And these kind of stuff is now facing a risk because of migration, because of people not willing to continue. Along with it, the development process and which is happening, government development processes. There were specific incidences like Marichapi massacre, which happened like there was some conflict which led to deaths, and the bodies were thrown along the national park. And the tigers actually started eating human flesh. Once they find human flesh, they get used to human flesh, and that increased the number of, it's said that they increased the number of man-eaters in this area. They like now coming more towards this. And of course, urbanization pressure around this area, which is So what you see here is Sundarbans is transforming and also has increasing uncertainty. But this is linked to the ecology, social ecosystem services, which is linked to community through the socio-cultural practices and knowledge base. The community and hazards have had this early warning systems, which now possibly are not able to keep pace with it, but there was a knowledge base. The hazards and livelihood is possibly where the increase in hazards is kind of making the livelihoods diversify and change, and also leading to too much of commercialization is leading to loss of fishes, agricultural lands, and stuff. And the livelihood and ecology again is connected through the economic asset because you are extracting from the ecology, but the process is not circular, it's just one-way process. And this is how Sundarbans is a very linked ecosystem. Looking into the Bon Bibi, which is the forest goddess. So if you read into Johannama, and it's interesting that you can actually read into Johannama because Amitabh Ghosh, I'm not sure how many of you have heard about Amitabh Ghosh or read him, but Amitabh Ghosh recently had translated Johannama into English. It's called, I think, Johor Story or something like that. So I saw it recently when I was there for a conference in Kolkata. So if you can get access to it, it would be good to understand this. So if you look into these 4 services, basic ecosystem services, Johannama actually talks about it. It talks about refraining from open defecation and smoking and washing utensils into the forest, which is actually a risk aversion mechanism. It talks about not catching fish during breeding seasons, not extracting wood or honey from small plants, how to use alternate patches of forest, no use of fire. It's again about regenerating the ecosystem services. Entering forest with clean hands, no arms, which is going to protect the wildlife. It's going to protect the ecosystem. And also certain when you should enter the forest, you should not enter the forest at night, at certain hours of the day, certain seasons. That helps in protecting the wildlife there. So in a way, the customary regulations have had the ecosystem services as the base and to maintain that balance as the main core idea of this developing this customary regulation. There are other such practices also which are there, like the traditional early warning systems. People can actually very easily say, I was interacting when I was there with people and like ask them, do you know when the cyclone is going to strike here? They said, yes, we know when, based on the moon position, the tidal conditions, we can say that whether the cyclone will go towards Odisha, which is the next district along, or it will strike Sundarbans, or it will move towards Dhaka. So there are those systems which are there. And what is happening now to this whole customary regulations is because of this disaster-induced mass migration, the continuity is broken. People it doesn't pass on from one generation to the other. This whole, Bon Bibi, there's this conflict of religion now. And this is very politically driven, where they're trying to, because this whole idea of Bon Bibi was to unify the population there. It's a mixed population with different religious belief. But now they have given a religious identity. So Bon Bibi is for one specific religion, whereas Bon Devi is for another religion. And that kind of a conflict actually breaks the whole purpose of uniformity. Also, the increase in tiger attacks, because people are moving towards them. They are being exposed to human flesh. That also reduces the faith on Bon Bibi because she is the protector. So people don't trust. So it's diluting the trust. And along with it, reduce access to forest reduction, resources, and the kind of change in livelihood diversification also brings in less dependence on the forest resources. So they don't really want to go back to such customary regulations because they are not interacting with the forest on a regular basis. Like right now, 50,000 people go into the forest every day. It's a huge number of people. But if you keep reducing it, so it also reduces your dependency and also all this customary regulations importance, the strength in this area. Last 2 slides. So in summary, if you look into it, what I want to say here is the change in perception has a significant impact on the mangrove ecology and the ecosystem services in Sundarbans. And that is very important for countering the extreme weather events and climate change, which is actually affecting the life and livelihoods in this area. The community enforced regulatory mechanisms and traditional approaches, as generally the government puts it, is harming the ecosystem services. It's not, but it's in a way a protector for the ecosystem services, a regenerator for the ecosystem services, and they should be taken up as that, and which would help in community maintaining it. It's a community-owned system, and it's very much people-centric adaptation approach to counter the challenges of the disasters and climate and linked to climate change. And what we are trying to do is understand this causal linkages, which needs to be understood in depth, that why such kind of issues are happening, why people don't want to continue, and what kind of alternate mechanisms can be created so that we revive this kind of customary regulations. It cannot just be like a government top-down approach saying that we need to have government policies and acts in place, but it needs to revive such kind of customary regulations which have been maintaining this area for centuries. These are some of the work that we have, and this is available online. It talks about the same thing, the customary regulations. It's a published paper for ICOMOS. And Risk to Resilience is a book that we are working on currently. I think in another 2 months it will be out. Thank you.